Hey, Matt Sitter here, CEO of AFN. At AFN, we believe that change is where opportunity happens, and the best way to get at the opportunity produced by change is a network that is diverse in experience, expertise, and perspective. As part of what we do at AFN, we want to bring forward the perspectives of our members. Cadie Hopkins is one of our CEO members within AFN. She's co-founder, executive producer, and creative director of Iron Butterfly. She was an Intel analyst in the DoD and has had a number of different other career experiences around it. Today, what we're going to talk about is her experience in building out Iron Butterfly, some of the things that contributed to her career path, and seeing what other threads we get to pull. Cadie, great to have you here. Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks everybody for coming. I'm really, really excited for this conversation.
So maybe the first thing, just like to set us on a baseline of what you're doing right now. Can you tell us a little bit about Iron Butterfly and where you're trying to take Iron Butterfly in the next set of years?
Yeah, sure. So my co-founder is on. So hi, Megan. Shout out to Megan. We co-founded Iron Butterfly together about 3 or 4 years ago. There's two parts of Iron Butterfly. We have Iron Butterfly Media, which is a for-profit LLC partnership between Megan and myself. We have a variety of podcasts and other kind of media projects that fall underneath Iron Butterfly Media. And our mission is really just to amplify the authentic voices of women in kind of traditionally not less than diverse industries. We've started in national security in the intelligence community and in the military because that's kind of where Megan and I come from. But we have plans to grow pretty far beyond that into other kind of either male-dominated industries or industries that, again, just kind of lack that diverse perspective, which obviously you all find very important as members of AFN. And then we also have a 501c3 nonprofit foundation. And so kind of the way that the two work together is that the media company is typically the way that people first interact with us. So whether it's through one of our podcasts, whether it's through one of our films or documentaries, they kind of interact with those ideas for the first time with the media company. We really hope to kind of plant that seed of inspiration that comes when you just see people leading with authenticity and just kind of speaking from an authentic voice. And then the foundation is really kind of provides the educational programs, the community, and the resources to help those people once they've kind of interacted with these ideas, kind of bringing their own ideas and creating. So that's kind of how we have formed our ecosystem, as we call it. And I think for us, what was really interesting is that we obviously started in the national security community, which was an interesting start because the more we've kind of learned about the space, like intelligence or national security are really just ways of describing like studying the world. And so what we've actually created is because we focus on women's voices, we've kind of gotten a unique viewpoint on history and on the world. And so it's kind of helped us understand the way that the world is just kind of at an inflection point right now in how women are involved in society, are standing in society, the impact that we can have, both in companies and in workplaces, but also just in other institutions. And so really kind of bringing that to the forefront has helped us just understand the problem and hopefully grow far beyond that.
Nice. Well, I do think it's an interesting switch when you're thinking about career-wise. It's like, when you're doing stuff in the DoD, it's a machine, right? You're a cog that's doing stuff. And now this is a very entrepreneurial activity.
Mm-hmm.
Did you identify as an entrepreneur prior to jumping into this?
No, not at all. It's funny. Megan, my co-founder, she always thought I was an entrepreneur, but I always told her that I wasn't. I don't know why I was so insistent on not being an entrepreneur. I think probably because my parents were entrepreneurs. So I was like trying to not be like my parents or something like that. So yeah, but I think it was part of like, in some ways, I think I had to live the experience of being in a system like that in order to understand like why creating was important, right? Because in some ways in government, and particularly in the national security community, it felt at times like the humanity was like sucked out of the job. Like as an analyst, it was like there was a bias towards like, let's be hyper logical, let's be like hyper fact based. Like if you can't point to a fact, then it shouldn't be brought up. And in some ways was an environment that just felt pretty sterile. And so I think in many ways existing in that environment actually was kind of like created the awareness in myself of just like, hey, there actually is a need here. Like there is a need to kind of bridge this gap between national security careers and like decisions that are really hard and really life and death, but also like the humanity of these people and like their lived experience. So in some ways, I think in a weird reverse psychology way, it actually made me more entrepreneurial because I felt like I didn't perfectly fit into the system in the way that it was designed.
Sure. Well, in Iron Butterfly, I would classify it as an exceptionally human business, right?
That's
You're
right.
thinking about the voices of people directly. And so,
That's exactly right.
that's a pretty big reaction.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I've spent some time in the technology sector as well. And like one thing I always bristle at when people talk about scaling companies is like, oh, you can't scale people. Like scaling people is not a sustainable way to scale a business, which I think to a certain extent is certainly true. But I think that's what I love about media is that it does actually get to scale like the very human elements of voices and like of stories and things that just have a different resonance.
Right. Okay, so you're on the journey now. You've got your own company. What surprised you along the way that you didn't know about running your own business that just really stuck in your head?
What has surprised me, Megan's probably gonna laugh at this, but like the extent to which you need lawyers, attorneys, and accountants, like very early in the process. I think there's many things that I think you can learn as you go. But I think there are certain like hard skills that I think we could have benefited from like earlier on. But I think the other thing that's really surprised me, maybe in the positive, is just when we started this company, we were always surprised that people wanted to share their stories with us. And I think what has been a very pleasant surprise for us, just like continuously, is that like we're not asking for a favor when we ask someone to tell their story, right? Like people want to share their story. People want to share pieces of themselves. They want to be understood as they authentically are and as they understand themselves. And so in many ways, like, and especially starting in the intelligence community, like these are women who have not ever shared their story publicly. And so in many cases, it's the first time that they've ever told their story. And there's like a really beautiful process that comes with that of just like coming to know yourself and like discovering yourself. Like some of the most rewarding moments for us have been when women come on the podcast and then we hear from them a few months later and they say, you made me like really reconsider some things or like think about things in a new way. And I'm now writing a book, or I'm now starting a blog, or I'm now doing this thing. So kind of helping people find that voice has also been really special.
Well, I think, most people who choose to serve in the intelligence community, like it's a pretty active choice that you want to do it, and you're doing it because you want to make an impact. And then you're giving them an opportunity for a secondary impact beyond that in a very different one, which is cool.
Yeah, well, and it's such an insular community, right? So like a lot of these voices typically wouldn't be heard unless it was by people who were already in the community. So it's actually like a really interesting touch point with just the broader public who like don't engage with these ideas very often, and certainly don't engage with these people very often.
Right. So as we're thinking about how you're building up Iron Butterfly, you mentioned your partner, Megan. Leading in a partnership can be very different than leading as an individual. What have you learned about leading in a partnership that would be valuable to impart on other people, and how you think about it and what you think makes it work?
Totally. I mean, I feel like the luckiest person in the world. I'm not just saying that because Megan's on the phone. I genuinely mean that. I think what has been so incredible about leading in a partnership is that, particularly with Megan, is that we are extremely complementary. Like we're very different people. Like like the anecdote I always use to describe this is when Megan starts to ask a question on the podcast, I genuinely have no idea what she's going to say. And we have been very, very close friends and partners for a very long time, right? like the way that her brain works, the way that she makes decisions, um, those things are very different from for the way that she like organizes herself. Like we're just very complementary in that way.
Right.
But the one thing that we do have in common is just that we always share values. Like we're very
Okay.
transparent with one
Yeah.
another. We're always honest about just how we're feeling about a specific situation. We trust each other. And like I can't name a single values disagreement that we've ever had. So that kind of provides the foundation for us to like be very different in the ways that we're
Right.
different because we have confidence that like on the things that matter, we won't disagree.
Well, you beat me to the punch because I was going to ask about like what is it that thing that allows you guys to work together? When when was it your friendship that allowed you to have those values, or the did you or that those shared values, did you identify that and then you became friends, or is that something that's kind of been, a lucky happenstance along the way?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question, actually. I think like Megan is one of those rare friends where like we've always created together. Like I met Megan in the context of a women's organization that she had built and then kind of transferred to me. So we really got to know each other in like the process of like building and evolving another organization together. Um, and so I guess in some ways the values came first in that like the network self-selected for that we were a part of. But I think like anytime you're working with people, like when you're entering a partnership, there's no possible way you could know everything about that person. And like there's going to be things that come up that you don't expect and like values questions that come up that you don't expect. And I think I've been very fortunate that like on all those things that do matter, we have been aligned because we've had team members in the past that haven't been aligned. And you know, we've had to part ways with those people, even though they were our friends. So I think, yeah, I've been very lucky in that regard.
Were you self-aware around the values congruence before launching it, or is it just like, hey, I really like doing this, I like doing it too, and then you're like, thank God, we think the same way.
Yeah, I would say I had a good feeling about it,
Okay.
but I don't
Yeah.
know that I knew like really. I didn't have certainty
Yeah.
around like
Yeah.
how it was actually going to play out or how those things were going to manifest.
All right. So partnership, you know, smallest sort of team that you can come up with. And I know you played soccer in college. I'm just curious as to how that influenced, probably your journey into the intelligence community, but then how you are thinking about working together with people, both your direct partner, but you have a bunch of different people that work at Iron Butterfly as well. What's influenced that journey along the way?
Yeah, totally. So it's funny, like reflecting back. I mean, I've always loved being on a team. Like working with people is like simultaneously like the most frustrating, but also like most fulfilling thing. Like people are just very complex and like especially on a team where you have like very, very good days and very, very bad days together. You like really see parts of people that I think you just don't normally see. It's also funny because like we were actually talking about this on the call because Betsy is also a soccer player and she was saying she was a right back, which runs a lot, and I was a center back, which didn't run a lot. And when we were chatting, I said like, oh, you were the one that ran a lot. I did as little of that as possible. And then I was thinking, I was like, man, that's like maybe a metaphor kind of, because I think in some ways, like my approach to just like working in teams in general is like the less work as a leader that I'm doing, like the better of a leader I am, like the better I'm leading, right? And of course, like you have to be a first mover and there needs to be a clear vision and like the values need to be clear and like all of those things. But I do think that when it comes to the work, like the more autonomy you can give, like the more ownership you can give, like and help people feel like they're building with you versus just like being tasked. I could see that parallel, I guess.
Okay. Um, and we'll talk a little bit more around the team at Iron Butterfly and how you think about managing that. But I'm just the journey into the intelligence community.
Mm.
What was it that drew you into that piece? Because I imagine there was a number of different opportunities you could have thought about post college.
Yeah, for sure. So funny story, I always for some reason knew that I wanted to work in national security and wanted to work in the intelligence community, but it took me a very long time to get in, like many, many years. So I actually started my career in the private sector and then moved back into the public sector and then have subsequently obviously moved out. I think so kind of flashback to like college, Cadie. I was originally from Arizona and I went to school in New York City. And I think because I played sports my whole life, I was like, oh, I'm going to be like a doctor or something. Because that was what I knew. And I remember meeting someone on campus my freshman year who became a friend of mine. And I asked her what she was studying. And she said, I'm studying political science. And I was like, what is that? I've never heard those words together in my life. And she was like, oh, it's like the study of government. And I remember thinking like, why would you ever do that? Like, could you even do that? And there was a presidential election my freshman year when I was on campus. And it was like the first time in my life that I'd heard people talk about the world and like global scale problems. And not only that, but like the problems to me were so complicated. Like it wasn't just like, oh, I sprained my ankle. Like, what do I do? It was like very complex, like groups of people, like systems of people, policies. And so from then on, I was just kind of hooked on it. So I ended up coming to DC because I knew I wanted to work in government. Started in consulting at a aerospace and defense focused company that basically helped commercial technology companies who had some dual use technology into the government. And I really enjoyed it. And I think it was important for me to start there, but I always knew I just wanted to see it up close and just kind of see how decisions were made. So ultimately made the switch to the government side.
Well, maybe in the future you'll have a podcast on women in aerospace and defense as an industry.
Yeah, it's a good one. That would be a good one.
There's a lot to learn around that.
Yeah.
So you spent a good amount of time in the intelligence community. What we talked about how some of what you've done with Iron Butterfly is a reaction to that, creating a very human opportunity for yourself. What are some of the big things that you learned while you were part of the intelligence community that continue to inform not just what you're doing at Iron Butterfly, but your life generally?
Yeah, for sure. So I think I learned that mission is very important to me, but like culture is also very important to me. I think when I would join the government, I would have basically given everything up to just do what was most important to me, like from a mission perspective. I think what I learned in the government was what I saw in the government and experienced in the government was just like a very rigid environment that was very hierarchical. And I think in many ways, sort of like sucked decision making up to the highest levels of the organization to like buy down risk. Like they didn't want people making decisions. Like they wanted you to pass the buck to your boss, who passed the buck to their boss, pass the buck, because the stakes were just really high in making mistakes. What I learned is I actually really like making mistakes, and like I like having the ability to make mistakes. And so I think for me, like working in a super high stakes environment just like wasn't the best place for me to learn, because I felt like I was never actually really able to make a decision. So I think in some ways that also relates to just like how we've built Iron Butterfly, of just like really giving people that ownership, really giving people that autonomy, and like, this is not like a life and death thing. Like there's nothing that's gonna happen that's not fixable. And then I also think that so we have a mentor of Iron Butterfly. Her name is Carmen Medina. She was the director of analysis at CIA probably a decade ago. And she just talks about how like she uses the phrase mail ordered system, which I think is just like a really helpful concept.
MALE, not
MALE. Yes.
Okay.
MALE ordered system.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. No, there's no like mail ordered bride situation going on here. So what she says is basically like, because most of the world's it's just a fact. Most of the world's institutions were built by the majority, and at that time it was a male majority, and there's no like value judgment on it. It's not like, oh, that's a really bad thing or that's a really good thing. It's just like, it just is a historical fact, right? And so I think in some ways I saw just the way that manifested in the culture of that organization, and how by not being part of that ordering group, like I was put into a position where I was almost like in rebellion of my organization all the time. And so I think that helped me see just like why it was important that we had ways for people to create like outside of systems too. And so I think in many ways was kind of like the personal inspiration or like the personal motivation, I guess, behind Iron Butterfly, and just like helping to spread that seed of inspiration of like, I can create new things. Like, and I know Megan and I both now strongly identify as entrepreneurs, and like there's something special about that.
And just on the mail ordered system portion, how stubborn do you feel like that is in these organizations? Is it changing at all?
Yeah, it's definitely changing. It's definitely changing. But there are certain parts of it that are just stickier than others.
Yeah. What are some of the things that you've seen already change?
I think I've definitely seen more women in senior leadership positions, for sure. I think like a lot of the middle management is where we struggle still, of just like the people who are actually leading people, at least on the government side. Like, I think we just struggle a little bit there. And then I think where there's still a little bit of work to be done is like, people just are different. Like, people think differently, people act differently. And especially in an environment like the Department of Defense, that's extremely like protocol based and very formal. You kind of have a way of like shaving off that, like those like eccentricities, I guess, that I felt like were kind of like the source of a lot of the new ideas that were being generated, but that was at times discouraged. But I do think it's changing, because I think that's the workforce expectation, and I think they have to.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a hard pill to swallow that diversity of thought can be a feature and not a bug when protocol driven organization.
Yeah, that's right.
So, you talked about the idea of autonomy, being able to take initiative. That's something that you feel like is a great place for you to be able to, learn, engage with the world. How are you encouraging that within Iron Butterfly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the way we encourage that on Iron Butterfly, first and foremost, is, so we have a really interesting situation in that we don't have any full-time employees right now. So all of our employees are very much part-time. And I think one of the ways we've been successful thus far is by, of course, we have organizational needs, but we actually allow the people who work for us, especially because it's not their full-time job, to shape what it is that they're doing. And I know that's the privilege of being like a very small company, because everything for us is net positive right now. But people are working on what they want to work on. So that's like a huge start. Like, no one's like, oh, this is such a drag, or like, I don't want to be doing this. And then I think in other ways, like, we don't make decisions for people. Like, if somebody brings us something, the response is always like, okay, great. Like, what do you think we should do? Like, your guess is better than ours on like what you think the right answer is. And then I think also just like, I've worked in environments where it feels like you can't make mistakes, and just like trying to create an environment where those are acknowledged and like just openly talked about, and not in a way that feels like shameful or like embarrassing. Like, it's just it's normal, and it's good if that's happening.
Do you think Iron Butterfly's future is like, do you envision a future where you have many full-time employees within it, or do you want to keep that sort of dynamic where, this is a part of people's lives, a very important part, but not the main or the only thing?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. I think there is definitely a world where we have full-time employees. I don't know if we can really like grow and scale without that, but I hadn't actually considered like having both. I think it would be really interesting to have both, like having some full-time employees, but also having people who are just like coming to Iron Butterfly because they want to grow a certain muscle for their own career or something like that. Like, because I think sometimes that's where you get the best work, is when people do it because they want to do it, and it doesn't feel like it's all consuming, but it's just like an investment they want to make in something that they care about and in their own career.
Yeah, I mean, that's always, it could be a part of your ethos going forward for the company. And you and I have talked before about your advisor group that you look at, and you even have a great name for them. Maybe do you want to just talk about that for a second? Because I think it's a really interesting element to what you guys are doing.
Yeah, of course. It's good timing because we actually had our kickoff call with them yesterday. So we have a group of women that are called the Iron Butterfly Monarchs, which is the fun name that Matt was referring to. And they are a group of women who has been extremely supportive. Some of them are friends, others are just folks who have come to us or like who are big fans of the podcast, fans of our content, believe in what we're doing. And they've all asked us, like, what can I do to help? And we haven't really had like a very compelling or like tangible ask for them, outside of just like, do you want to donate to our 501c3? But for people who that's not reasonable ask for, or who are looking to do so in like a more active way, we are basically bringing them on as sort of ambassadors to just like help us spread the word. Like, of course, help connects us to funding sources or sponsors or things like that. But like we're a media business. So like the more people that we have who are sharing our content with their friends, with their family, with their social media networks, with their alma maters or universities, like that's really what we kind of see them helping us with, and just like being an extension of the brand and the culture that we're creating.
Well, I think it's an excellent way to keep people engaged in the community around you guys too. And I think, again, like that emphasis on the human element of what you're doing is really important. So as you're thinking about, so the Iron Butterfly podcast was the first one that you got. What's coming up for Iron Butterfly?
Yeah, definitely. So we have a new podcast that we're launching over the summer called Women in the Arena. So we met a U.S. Army Special Operations veteran named Sarah Scully. She has a fascinating background. She actually spent time in Afghanistan training the only Afghan women Special Operations unit. So there was a portion of the Afghan army that was women-led, which is extremely radical in a country like Afghanistan. And they basically had to pass all the same tests that U.S. Special Operations soldiers have to pass, like extremely physically, emotionally, mentally high bar. So she separated from the military pretty recently, a few months ago, and she actually came to us, and it was the first time that we've always kind of mentored people through like, oh, how do I start a podcast? But she actually came to us and said, like, I want to do a podcast, but I actually want it to be part of Iron Butterfly, which was a very cool moment for us. So she's going to be doing kind of a similar style to us, but just interviewing women who are active duty military or U.S. or who are veterans, not necessarily U.S., but who are active duty or veterans. And then we just got approached by someone else who really wants to do kind of a similar podcast for women in wildlife and conservation, which would be really cool. A really cool addition as well. That would be kind of our first departure from the national security space. And then in parallel, we've also been producing and directing a documentary feature film on women in the intelligence community. So we actually just got the first draft of our official trailer last week, which is really exciting. So we'll definitely be sure to
When's
share.
that getting out there?
Yeah, it should be out. Well, so we're going to have to actually get it approved by the agencies. So
Okay.
that's the long pole in the tent at this point. But it should be out within the next few weeks to a month. So that's really exciting as well. And then in parallel, building out our foundation and like actually starting to create some educational programs and like community building events and to just kind of build that arm as well.
Well, and the media business, I think, is interesting in the way that there's a lot of complaints about social media out there right now, of course. But the fact that you guys can very efficiently build up a media business that can have a large impact, I think is a great thing for us to be able to see and to be able to just like create in the way that you thought was so important, right? With, lesser resources than if you were to try to do this 30 years ago.
Totally.
Couldn't do it. Wouldn't have been possible, right?
Yeah.
So all sorts of new things are possible.
Yeah, it is pretty crazy to see how, I mean, it is very low barrier to entry. It really is. Like, we, of course, have made some investments in just having nice cameras and having nice mics and like trying to make it feel intimate for the viewer. But yeah, it's not high barrier. I think where we are right now is like, we're not media. We've never worked in media before. So just like trying to crack the social media algorithm code and things to just like really share our content like really as widely and as broadly as possible to build the following. So, but yeah, we're on our way.
Well, and so barrier to entry is low, but you still got to create quality to have some staying power. And I think that you guys are there. So that's good stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Cadie, this was an awesome conversation. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.